Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com, or this week's episode of the Market Monday. Had a different topic for today, but now I think it's just going to be turning into analysis of the banned and restricted update. They actually did it. They did it. Jace the Mindsculptor and Bloodbraid Elf are unbanned. And first of all, I'm going to go off on just a little bit of a rant, just an ethical rant, in my opinion, about Jace the Mindsculptor. I don't mind Bloodbraid Elf either, and in fact, I wouldn't mind Jace the Mindsculptor if it would have been announced at any other period in the Magic. Probably not right before Eternal Masters either. This, to me, looks very scummy on the side of Wizards of the Coast. You can actually go check out a few other articles. Once again, our Lord and Savior Seth from MC Goldfish wrote a great article about how did not want any changes to Modern, even though Jace and Bloodbraid were probably safe. And it's a great article. I'll try to put in the link in the description below, and you can go read it for yourself. And I had to agree so much with the analysis that Seth puts in the article that over this weekend we had an insanely diverse GP Toronto with, what would they say, like 30, or what was it that Seth, there was like 30 different decks that were, or so 10 on day number one that had undefeated records at GP Toronto, 30 winning different archetypes at the Pro Tour, and a very, very diverse top 8 at the Pro Tour and GP Toronto, as well as a top 32. So Modern, for diversity's sake, was insanely popular, and there were a lot of different archetypes you could be successful with. And we actually saw the winning decks at the Pro Tour and the Grand Prix be very different. One being Lantern Control, which has never really had a spotlight as a tier 1 deck. It's always been kind of a tier 2. Same thing with Bogles. They've been around forever. They are good decks when the meta is correct to choose them, and just how quickly, like how hard it is to judge the meta for Modern when you're going into a competition, because Bogles and Lantern Control, they have definitely different matchups they're really good against. Bogles preys on a lot of the fair decks. Lantern Control preys on a lot of the unfair decks. And it's funny because Bogles is actually kind of miserable to play against Lantern Control because of the ensnaring bridge and other ways that the hand gets ripped out. But anyway, I digress with that analysis for Modern. This one, again, going back to Jace the Mindsculptor and Bloodbraid Elf, personally, I've talked about this past too. I've talked about cards that I think are safe to unban. I am not the biggest fan of Bloodbraid Elf because it used to push out other mid-range strategies into Jund no matter what. So instead of trying to go Sultai, instead of trying to go Abzan, instead of trying to go even Teamer, I guess you could go Teamer and Bloodbraid Elf, that everyone always went into Jund, because one of the most powerful things you could do in Modern was to go Bloodbraid Elf into Liliana, or Bloodbraid Elf into, and one of the reasons why they banned it, by the way, is it was so swingy. A lot of games just hinged on if Bloodbraid Elf hit the right card off of the top of your library. So a lot of times it could hit some cards that just were ineffective at the point, like the Inquisition of Kozilek, when there just wasn't a target in hand at that point, or it could just hit like a Terminate with no target on board, things like that. It's so Bloodbraid Elf, it does have that kind of swingy aspect to it, and they didn't like the randomness of you roll the die. They wanted to get away from so many of these effects that you roll the die to try to, based on just RNG, whether or not that it ended up being like a winning play or not. So people forget that's actually one of the reasons why Bloodbraid Elf was originally banned. Jace the Mindsculptor has never had its day in the sun. I particularly don't like Jace the Mindsculptor in the Modern format because Seth put it out perfectly. It's kind of like a win more card where it's more of a if you're able to establish Jace, like right in Modern, if you're able to get to that 4 slot right now in a lot of these decks that are going to utilize Jace, you've probably already won the game or close to winning the game. And then Jace is just one of those win cons that then is very annoying and grindy to then just to lock out the game. And so if you don't like playing against Lantern Control, just wait till you play against Jace the Mindsculptor and get Fate Sealed controlled out of the game, and then eventually they have to tick up, but then it mills your library and then you lose. So it's going to push out, for diversity's sake, if they wanted a lot of win conditions, Jace the Mindsculptor is bad because now everyone's just going to use Jace the Mindsculptor as the win condition in these blue control decks. So we're gonna do some analysis on the blue control decks, where I think that a lot of the cards are actually going to be sells now, not because the archetype is gone, but Jace is just going to swallow them up. So we'll also look at how Bloodbraid Elf, I think, will affect the format. Again, Bloodbraid Elf is probably easily the safer. I wish I would have seen Bloodbraid Elf and Stoneforge Mystic unbanned. Stoneforge Mystic might have had the exact same problem that Jace had, though. A lot of people would have just switched over to Stoneforge Mystic as kind of the value win condition, rather than going these very diverse ways to do so. Back to my little rant, though, about the ethical rant. I guess I didn't finish my point there. This is just entirely scummy on Wizards of the Coast part, because they are using an unban to hype a set. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, I put integrity of the game in front of everything imaginable. Like, you should try to keep the integrity of your game beyond profit margins, beyond trying to spice things up, beyond anything, because you want gameplay to be in its just most innocent form. You want this just like innovation, creativity, skill to determine the route of how a game develops. You don't want to be a company that pushes agendas, or in this case, pushes Jace the Mindsculptor to a competitive field to pump your newest set that's coming out. So this is just all to create hype that they put on the damn package. That's what's so scummy, is we already know that it's in this set that is coming out. So Jace the Mindsculptor, of course, is going to go through the roof. And it just to me just looks, they shouldn't, if they wanted to unban Jace the Mindsculptor, they needed to do it after their set had been sold, or during a time period where Jace the Mindsculptor was not on any sort of upcoming product. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Bloodbraid Elf also in this Masters 25, which even looks even more scummy. And just shame on Wizards for that, because that is just a dishonest way to sell a product, in my opinion, by using bans or unbans to push product movement. So again, it's just, I don't think that we should stand up for that kind of nonsense. So anyway, so Jace, I think, was a horrible decision based upon diversity's sake of the format, as well as this Masters 25 coming out. So let's just go ahead and look at the prices here. Of course, the movers and shakers are going to be, everything looks like it's, look at that, everything is stuck on MTG Goldfish at the moment. But let's look at Jace. We just sold out of our Jaces because they spiked up. Now we're kind of kicking ourselves with it, but the risk was just there. It doesn't look like it spiked too much. Let's go over here to see if, remember, there's a lot of these copies out there, and I think that, let's see if there's on TCG Player. Oh, it's going for 140. Oh, yeah. All right, whatever. Also, this little thing, if they wanted to reduce the cost of Modern, all of a sudden, Modern now isn't accessible again because you need to pick up these damn Jaces, which, again, people are going to have to buy their stupid new set to get. Ay. So, there's Jace, and Bloodbraid Elf, I'm sure, is the exact same nonsense that's going on. It just got a reprint, too. $5. It's an uncommon, which is actually going to lead me to another discussion later on. Bloodbraid Elf is currently going for, $10 each. $10 a pop for the cheap version of the Bloodbraid Elf. So, yep, this is a card, too, that in the past was very good in these Jund-based decks. I think this Legacy decks actually does, work just like Jund works. Look at that. It's pretty much all the cards that are available in Jund. So take out Hymn to Torak, take out Deathrite Shaman, and in this place you can put a few other, there's Abrupt Decays already, so Maelstrom Pulse can go here, and a few other cards, and this is basically just the stock list that sees play in Modern right here. So anyway, we'll check out Bloodbraid Elf in a second, but this is where I think cards that are going to be overshadowed now by Jace the Mindsculptor. I think that these, let's look at actual U-White Control. U-White Control's traditional win condition used to go for Gideon the Trials, Jace Architect of Thought, and Gideon Jura. I don't think that these cards are going to be there anymore. Gideon Jura does play a slot in this deck where it locks down your opponent's ability to attack into you, and they just have to keep attacking into creatures, this could still be a one of. However, I think that this slot right here, Jace Architect of Thought, definitely, I think will be relegated to more of a sideboard, as I think that this might be good against like Lingering Souls versions, but it's pretty much terrible versus a lot of the field. This was just like a mini Jace. The ability to pump this up to, or use its -2s to actually dig for cards and sort of slow down your opponent, just does a weaker job than Jace the Mindsculptor. Jace the Mindsculptor also has the ability to bounce a creature, which is insanely powerful in Modern, which might just, again, overshadow what Gideon's trying to do here. So I think that these are gone. Getting the Trials might still be interesting because it's something that can come down and immediately plus. But I think that this go the Gideon route is done. So if you have any Jace Architect of Thoughts, Gideons of the Trials, and Gideon Juras, I don't think that these are going to have any sort of play in the blue-white control, because Jace is just a better shoe-in at this point. The rest of the shell will probably stay very similar. I don't know if there's a need for Search for Azcanta as much anymore, with there's Jace as your card draw engine. Probably will stick in as a 2 of, but the rest of this will definitely stick here. So if you have any investments that you want to get in on Jace, this would be the cards that I would look at. Look at the buying in the Cryptic Commands, the Supreme Verdicts, the Sphinx's Revelations, and whatnot. We could actually see a price increase of the Wall of Omens just to help protect Jace. Snapcaster Mage could even go up, as blue decks will now have a bigger time in the sun. We have the Celestial Colonnade, the Flooded Strands, all of the blue fetch lands could definitely go up because of this. And a lot of these decks that go in the white control. The Jeskai control versions are very similar to this. I think that some amount of Jaces are just going to be shoved in here. This one is more of the Jeskai utilizes a more Snapcaster route. There's also a Jeskai Tempo. I don't think Jace really does fit in the Jeskai Tempo, but I'm sure a lot of these decks are just going to throw Jace in the sideboard. So a lot of even the decks like the Jeskai Tempo is just going to put 4 Jaces in the sideboard, and they come in versus decks that are weak against Jace. So I also think like Blue Moon might want Jace the Mindsculptor, or Madcap Moon here might actually throw a Jace in here. This isn't Madcap Moon. This is Snapcaster. Maybe they are calling this, because this is not Madcap Moon at all. This is Goldfish is having a problem like putting these together. This is just Pyromancer, blue-red Pyromancer. Madcap Moon is more of a control route that uses Spreading Seas and Blood Moon. And there it is. So it's the Platinum Imperium, Vendilion Click, and then they use the Madcap to get it out. Maybe this Madcap is not even here. They just throw Jason something like this. So now we have just a blue-red version of a lot of control with Jace. I also see this with like the Through the Breach type strategies, or even the wannabe Splinter Twin type strategies with the blue-red decks actually throwing Jace in here as well. Remember, Jace is very good at digging for your combo pieces with it. So most of these decks, I think, are going to morph over to some sort of Jace strategy. It could breed Esper. Esper control also could start getting some limelight. So the good news is, though, that Jace isn't the best. Like, I don't think it gives these decks any more that much more of an edge than, like, if when white blue control is good, I don't know if Jace is going to make it the matchups that much better. I still think that Jace might have a problem with Reality Smasher is a good card. It's a good answer to Jace. Thought-Knot Seer can still rip it out. There are a lot of, like, Tron, I still think is going to be really good versus the blue-white control. So you might see an influx of an already saturated deck that's starting to tick up in the meta, as it's good versus a variety of decks in the form of Tron, because I don't think that control decks can really keep up with the ability for Tron to just continue to like top deck. This is one of the best top decking decks, because then their Ancient Stirrings later on become tutors to go get their other cards once they have established Tron. So you might actually see some Jace the Mindsculptor decks actually move over to a lot of land destruction type decks, but then the Tron decks can also morph over to kind of the way to deal with those type of strategies as well. So Tron could see an influx. Grixis Shadow could actually even chuck in Jace here in a slot. And the 4 mana might be a little bit tough. You can see that nothing in this entire deck costs 4 mana, as they don't play a incredibly heavy land count, and you want to get your cards out as quickly as possible, establish those threats, and then finish off with just these Death Shadows that have to be taken care of. So 5-color humans I still think does a great job versus Jace 2. This is a deck that seems miserable for a control deck to try to stabilize with, especially with the Kite Sail freebooters and post-board like the Sin Collectors ripping out what you're trying to do. So again, that's just my analysis. I think that Jace won't have the greatest impact, and that's why I don't like buying into Jace. Jace has just been one of those weird cards that is always had this overhype. The price memory has been so real with that card. It had a hard, I don't think it ever went below like 65. And just is because once it got to that point, the Commander players, of course, wanted to chuck. It's one of the best cards you can play in Commander, at least as Planeswalkers are concerned. And so it's now the new most expensive card in Modern, but it hasn't proved itself yet. There's more supply of it out there probably than Liliana. They might be very similar because Jace has had a printing in a From the Vaults, had a printing in Eternal Masters, and then had the printing in Rise of the Eldrazi. Is that the one, or Worldwake? Whichever one it was printed. Worldwake? Yeah, I think it's Worldwake that Jace was in. And I don't know if the combined combinations of those are higher supply than Liliana being Innistrad and Modern Masters. Okay, so I think Liliana actually does have more supply out there. I do expect Liliana to be in this from our Masters 25 as well. I wouldn't be surprised if there's Karn in this one too. So I think the Masters 25 is going to be packed full of value. We'll have to wait to see how it pans out. Now let's go to Bloodbraid Elf. Bloodbraid Elf already, it seems like that Jund, like 5-color humans is the new like route. A lot of people are going for this sort of tempo deck, that aggro deck that can go into the later games. So they just established with these early effects, and they use their creatures as spells. So Meddling Mage locks down a card, Kite Sail Freebooter takes out a card, the Thalia's Lieutenant taxes cards, and eventually the Reflector Mage bounces, and eventually we have some cards that just aggro out your opponent, like the Kestis Malcontents and the Mantis Rider. And it's just one of those decks that is just going to continue to apply pressure and apply pressure through a lot of the control cards like Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Supreme Verdict, whatnot. So that what really gets good too is their sideboard is insanely diverse, where they can bring in a number of cards depending on the deck that they're playing against to help shut those down as well. So going forward with Bloodbraid Elf, it will, I think, give Jace some new legs. It could actually even see play in a deck like Traverse Shadow as just the 4. They might throw it in the 4. It has some very weak cards that Bloodbraid Elf, a lot of times they don't like to go Teamer because it can hit cards like a Stubborn Denial off the top, or like a Mana Leak or things like that, and then Bloodbraid Elf ends up being a dead card. I think the Bloodbraid Elf traditionally has seen the most play in Jund just because of that effect of hitting Liliana. So we can see the Jund decks, see if there's any Jund decks even lying around lately. It's been a archetype that, again, just hasn't seen much play in quite a while, just because of how the Mardu Pyromancer and the Shadow decks have just done a better job at doing what old school Jund used to do. In fact, a lot of these decks, even this is Jund, have been going over to black green mid range because the red is just unnecessary. One of the reasons why they used to play red in the Jund version was the Lightning Bolt was the removal spell of choice. Fatal Push didn't exist, and now just black itself has enough control between Abrupt Decay, Fatal Push, Maelstrom Pulse in this slot. It can answer everything that red used to need to go in there to answer. So this one just doesn't get hit by Blood Moon as bad as like the Jund gets hit by, or like even a lot of lands coming to play tapped, the burn, that sort of thing. It's a lot more easy on the mana with it. So, but this is basically how Jund is morphed over. So we could see this deck go back to Jund. So scrap these Tireless Trackers, throw back in the Bloodbraid Elf, and call it good. They can throw back in a Terminate. They can throw back in Lightning Bolts, go down in the amount of Maelstrom Pulses, maybe Inquisitions and Thoughtseizes down a little bit, and splash some black in here. Black still, or splash some red in here. Red still does get some pretty good cards like Kolaghan's Command, which is insanely good right now in the meta with Lantern Control and other artifacts that do need to be addressed. So people could go back from the black-green mid-range back over to the Jund. So keep that in mind. I don't think that it necessarily spikes a lot of these decks because these decks are already pretty much established. And again, it will give legs back to the Jund decks, but I don't think that, I think that Tyler's Tracker, I think that the CES analysis is also spot on, that even cards like Tyler's Tracker seem to be just as powerful as Bloodbraid Elf in today's day and age. So the funny thing is, though, Bloodbraid can't even hit a Tireless Tracker or a Liliana, or, you know, the good old Maelstrom Pulse type cards. So that might just be a better route to go than the black-green mid-range. So where do I expect the format to go forward? Again, I do think that Jace is going to screw it up. I think that we had this little window of openings for a lot of diverse little decks, at least on the mid-range and control aspect. And for a while, I think people are just going to shoe in, try to throw in Jace in every deck possible. I don't think it's going to really be effective. I think it's just going to be more annoying. So if you didn't like playing against the control decks before, prepare yourself for Jace, because if you've never, the whole problem is I don't think that a lot of people that are in Modern right now even remember playing against Jace. It's to that point where Jace is old enough that newer people in the last, you know, 4 or 5 years even now didn't play against the Zendikar, the Caw-Blade. And I think that a lot of us still have like PTSD for Jace the Mindsculptor, because those games were so miserable once they established the Fate Seal lock. It's Lantern Control all over again, and you just had to sit and wait and just watch your opponent just slowly but surely tax you out until you, or Fate Seal you out until they win the game. So anyway, that's my analysis for the market. Last but not least, let's address this other issue that's going on. For a more detailed analysis on this, go watch my live stream. I think it's in between where the leagues. I play a league with the Kami Lock in Pauper. I kind of went on a Rudy rant, a Rudy tirade about his Pauper video, which I do believe is directed a lot towards me, because I think I'm the most outspoken person that has been investing in Pauper. Go watch Rudy's video, go watch my live stream. I address it mostly there, but one of these days, I just think that people are going to realize the Emperor is not wearing any clothes. What I mean by that is I don't think that Rudy is I don't consider him really much of an MTG Finance person, because he's so out of the game. He's so stuck in his legacy vintage years, and is tunnel visioned and invests accordingly. That is why I think that the Fetchland analysis, the Fetchland investment was bad advice, and still continues to be bad advice. The Khans of Tarkir, same thing. That set was overprinted into oblivion. There is just a lot of disconnect with where the things that used to work in MTG Finance no longer hold true. And I think that Pauper has a lot more legs, and the entire argument of Rudy's Pauper video was, these are commons, they're worthless. Well, commons aren't worthless. There's a little card called Street Wraith that I love to show. It's a common that is a $10 common. And by Rudy's analysis, this card should have never been $10, because these are mysterious. There's these boxes of bulk pallets that exist. Like this person, I guess I have 1 million of these. And it's like, yep, okay, you have 1 million, sure, then sell them. So what is stopping people, if they have so many of these, to inject them back into the supply? And shouldn't they just go down? Like, I keep hearing this argument, like right here, like, oh wow, Street Race were $2. People are now just going to go get to dig these out of their bulk and then sell them off, and then it will crash back down. Wait a second, maybe it happened right here. $2.50. People started selling them all off, and there's where the bulk ended. There's where everyone digging their stuff out of their bulk bins ended. And it just got massively, the price increased like crazy. This is, if you want a case study for where commons and uncommons especially can go, just look at modern staples. Just look at even commander staples like the Rhystic Studies. Rhystic Study, a Prophecy. Prophecy doesn't have the greatest supply, but this is another card that apparently, if there's these mysterious bulk pallets existing out there, this card should have never been able to get to $10. Why aren't people just going and finding those bazillion copies, millions upon millions of Rhystic Study copies, and then digging them out of bulk and selling them and crashing the price? Well, because there are millions upon millions of commander players. There are millions upon millions of commander decks out there. Commons can be outstretched from the supply just like rares and uncommons. Yes, it takes longer, but this is a very good example of how many decks just run Rhystic Studies. If Evolving Wilds wouldn't have been continually reprinted and reprinting, Evolving Wilds would be an expensive card, even if it only had one common reprinting. Look at Lightning Bolt as a good example. Lightning Bolt has a stock that is very, very, very common. This has been printed in 4th edition and revised, which were extremely high print runs. It was reprinted in the M10, M11, Modern Masters 2. It's been in a number of different promotional boxes, and it continues to go up in value, even though there are so many of these in existence, because supply of how many decks need 4 of these in their decks is outstretching even the demand of insane print runs of a card like Lightning Bolt. So the card that Rudy went crazy about was a card called Pyroblast and Hydroblast. He showed he had an entire box of them and how he was upset that he could trade an entire box of these cards for a Black Lotus. Well, Rudy, this is just reality for you. The demand for Pyroblast equals the demand, the $1.62 of the demand for Pyroblast. That many Pauper decks and Legacy and Vintage decks that want Pyroblast is the same demand for the one person that wants the Black Lotus, or the handful of people that want the Black Lotus. It is simple supply and demand. It's funny how Rudy is talking about nefarious investors, where the only nefarious investment that I think has taken place in the last while, which again, people have their own prerogatives, is this Bazaar of Baghdad, which we know happened to a pump and dump right here. I think this is exactly where Rudy made the video of how many bazaars went mysteriously up, and look, someone mysteriously injected bazaars back into the supply line, and it crashed back down in value, and is probably going to go back to, its normal settle down to around this $800 mark. And that is that. This card is seeing play in just Vintage. It's a dying card in the long run. I think Vintage is an I don't know, just that it's the more longer and longer this format goes on, the less and less people are going to play it. I think it is become like a good old boys club with the people that do play Vintage. It's just inaccessible to the average person, and I think that if you want to talk about cards that are just in collector's hand and investors' hands, one of these days people will want to get out of these. It probably will, though. The demand, the collector demand, will outstretch the vendor demand, or the vendors trying to make a buck off of these, or that invested into them, and it'll stabilize and keep having that slight trajectory that's always had. But this is reserveless cards, I think, are a lot more volatile than even Pauper cards at this point, because it still has the same concepts as you have to have someone that wants them. When is this going to hit the point where people just no longer care to collect in like these old Magic cards, these a format that no one can play? It is like the Rolls Royce. It is like showing off your Ferrari type thing in the nerd culture to have some of these cards. And I think that will hold true for very specific of these cards. But to me, there's a lot of volatility even if the reserve list does happen to have a reprint. We've had a lot of people analyze it, saying it's impossible because of the lawsuits that would happen. You never know, though. I think that if Wizards does give like a warning period, that they could easily avoid lawsuits at that point, to then say, hey, reserve list will be abolished on this day, so here is your time period to get out of them. And that's even a more foreseeable outcome than all of a sudden Wizards deciding they're just going to reprint Pauper into oblivion. Do I think there will be Pauper reprints? Absolutely. Do I think that the reprints will only suffice the demand that is currently being achieved by Pauper? Yes. I think that Pauper decks from now on are going to be between $50 to $100, and they'll briefly go above the $100 mark. The cards in them that are causing it to go up above $100 will get reprinted, and we'll see the rinse and repeat the same way we see with Modern. We've seen a lot of cards get a reprint, cards like even like Path to Exile, cards like we can even look at like Damnation and stuff like that, and then they creep up, or even they creep up, get reprinted, go back down to nothing, creep up, get reprinted, go back down, creep up. We see this cycle happen all the time. No matter the reprints just suffice the demand. It's a hard time to actually kill the demand with particular cards. Now, some of these are obscure and do have low supply, and this is what Rudy was showing, just how many Pyroblasts and Hydroblast that in the box that he had. Well, this card was going up before this whole craze in Pauper. The Pauper craze started here. So the account for Pyroblast going from a 70-cent card, which was never bulk, mind you, to a $1.50 was just even vintage and legacy. Once Pauper started taking it up, it went up here. It got reprinted in Eternal Masters and did its normal trajectory down for a little bit over a year and a half, which is very, very, very common for reprints. And now it is going back up again with the hype. Whether or not people have pallets of these things is irrelevant. If they want to inject them back in the market, sure, that's something that needs to be absorbed again. But I'm telling you, the craze for Pauper is that great. For a more in-depth analysis, definitely go check out my live stream around the 2-hour mark, I think is when, maybe hour-half mark, is where I really get into it and start proving that the leagues are insanely healthy. The Pauper being played at the local game store level is insanely healthy. Just the outlook of there's no economic indication to show that Pauper is slowing down. If for anything, it is going up. And eventually, we are going to see major price increases in many of the cards due to actual real demand, not just people like me that are speccing on the format. So I think that the entire video is a little bit disingenuous, a little bit like narrow-minded and tunnel-visioned with just the overall outlook of the format. If commons could not go up in value, then how come Manamorphosis, how come Serum Visions, how come even cards like, I think we're even seeing the cards like the Pyretic Ritual? Let's see, I can't even spell pyro. What's the other ritual called? Ritual. The storm cards. So yeah, Desperate Ritual. We'll just look at Desperate Ritual. How come a card like Desperate Ritual can hit $2 if commons are worthless and these are just in bulk bins? This card has a lot of reprintings in a dual deck Mind versus Might, in the Champions of Kamigawa, very highly open set. The Modern Masters, very highly open set. Another card that can hit the dollar mark. Here's another one, Lava Spike. Lava Spike is a Modern Masters and Champion as well. A $5 common. We can do this all day with common cards that have real world value. And if there's a mysterious bulk out there, then why the hell aren't people picking through it to find these $5 cards? What rings true in Modern, what rings true in Legacy, what rings true in Commander, rings true in other formats. And Pauper is even a big exception to this because they take a lot of these commons. They have to take commons, and this card, like Lava Spike or other cards like Delver's Secrets, becomes the Tarmogoyf of the format, becomes the high demand card, becomes the demand that everyone needs 4 of. And again, if there even is, 50 Delver's Secrets per Liliana, or whatever the rate is of commons to mythics, that just shows how many decks have to be created for a very accessible format like Pauper before the demand is actually greater for Delver's Secrets than even a Liliana. And we're starting to see that like crazy in the Pauper format. So let's just check out some Pauper cards here. Again, I don't know if this mover shaker is just bugged right now on Goldfish. It looks like it is. Yeah, it's bugged. I don't know what's going on with the Pauper, but a lot of these decks, we'll just go back over to Pauper and check out a few of the decks. You can see that we're starting to see many of the decks already breach the $50 mark, and we've seen a few of them even go up to the $100. Most of the $100 decks are using Chainer's Edict, Oubliette, or Snow-Covered Islands. Those are the ones that have hit that price tag. But you can even see even decks like Kudatha Boros, which was a very inexpensive deck at one point in time, now coming close to that $75 mark because of using the 4 lightning bolts, using prismatic strands, the battle screeches, all of these cards that were worth nothing, that are worth nothing, that are insanely hard to actually find on the internet. So yes, go find your pallets of bulk. Please inject the market with this supply. If you try to inject too much, there'll be people like me that are willing to sit on them for periods of time that will buy you out. There have been many people that were doing just the Rudy strategy of putting only 8 up at a time, and I was eating them up. Make them ship 8 to me at a time. Eat those eBay fees. Eat that transaction fee trying to sell me these cards. And I was buying them all day. And I do have a stockpile of tons and tons of cards, but we are in the infancy of the Pauper demand. People said the exact same thing about Modern. When Modern, you guys are dumb investing in this unproven format. People said the same thing about Commander. People said the same thing about Tiny Leaders and Frontier, which, of course, those ones did not have legs and were eventually fell flat. But the big difference, like I said in my misconception video, is Pauper does have legs. It has support. It has the community behind it. It's got a very vibrant Reddit subreddit. It has the most popular celebrity in Magic the Gathering who has a reach greater than any even company and even greater than any. I would say that in this day and age, Tulane Community College is more relevant than LSV. I think LSV would be the probably the most recognizable pro. Would that be fair to say? And I think that even LSV has been on the Pauper train lately. I mean, he does have equity in Channel Fireball, so I think that he should start playing just to showcase it. I never did understand why that Channel Fireball just didn't buy out like thousands upon thousands of Pauper cards before they announced the format. They kind of got even blindsided. Star City Games got blindsided by the demand, just the sheer demand that the Pauper format brought to the table when it was announced. So these cards will continue to go up. Just last but not least, let's look at another worthless, look at this worthless common card that there's billions of these just sitting around on bulk bins. How is this a $5 card? This is just a scam, and it gets reprinted every other year. Oh man, all these people just scamming people with these Relic of Progenitus. They not know how many of these exist. How many people have boxes full of Relic of Progenitus? I guess is the right battle cry for this. So there's my rant for the day. Sometimes you just have to realize the Emperor is not wearing clothes. I'm okay with Rudy being a personality in the YouTube community. I think the vast majority of people just watch Rudy for the kind of antics, just the, throwing his arms, flaying those arms around and just putting props in a video and having a character and a persona. There's nothing wrong with that. I love Rudy. I watch Rudy's stuff. I have no problem with Rudy. A lot of times I think that his advice can be very narrow-minded, very tunnel-visioned, and does kind of reek of just kind of the good old boys club, just people that like to invest in the higher-end things. A little bit of story, too. I used to be a big fan of Shark Tank, and Kevin O'Leary tells the story about how he tried to get into the wine business because he was a wine connoisseur. And so he created a wine brand and just lost oodles of money. He even admits now that it's just like a novelty. He just wanted to own a wine company because he's like, hey, I have brand image. I know what I'm doing. I'm this finance person. I'm going to create this wine, and it's just going to take everyone by storm, blah, 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 blah. Tries to peddle it to all the distributors, and they told him to basically go to hell because 96% of all bottles of wine were sold for under $60. The market for wine was cheap wine, not expensive wine. And you could go try to find people to buy your expensive wine, but it's a highly competitive market with other luxury items that people are trying to sell at every given time. And the vast majority of people just want to get, just want to get drunk. That's what it is. Or want to get tipsy they want a bottle of wine with their dinner. They don't want to be completely have to sell their car to afford these nonsense wines. And he learned the hard way that was the market. That these expensive things, these luxury, vintage, legacy formats do exist, but the bread and butter magic is always going to be the common people, is always going to be the Pauper. Is always people just wanting to play a fun, vibrant format. That's where the money is going to move. 96% of the money is probably moving in formats that are vibrant, not legacy, not vintage. The money's still there because the 4% still have a lot of, or the 5%, or whatever the statistics of people that actually play legacy or vintage. They have the money, like the Rudies, that are already established, that have a lot of money to move around. Those do make good investments if you know the market and whatnot, but I don't think that is any reason to kind of crap on these other formats that are definitely starting to see a mass movement in money. So for closing here, yes, there might be for every one Black Lotus, 100,000 Pyroblasts, but there are probably 100,000 people that want a Pyroblast for every one person that wants a Black Lotus, and therefore that is why it is worth the same as a Black Lotus. So just trying to say that these are worthless assets, commons, blah, 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 is very disingenuous and doesn't show the full picture. The reality of the fact is Pauper is on the move, and either get ahead of it or get crushed later on. Kevin with RogueDeckbuilder.com. Thanks for watching.